So our plan was to go to maybe visit Congress this month, but we hit a little snag on January 6th, and it's taken us a while to get back on track. We had to modify our plans a little bit, but we're going to try to get a little bit of an inside view of the Capitol from our speaker today. So so let's get started with that. I'm going to queue up some photos as we go along that Abigail sent me last night, and she'll be telling you about them. But I added a slide to the one picture to the beginning of it. I was in Washington last fall to see to visit the celebration of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life, and when I left, I thought I would take a picture of the Capitol, and I stepped onto a grassy field and took a picture that I'm so glad I did, because I didn't have any idea it'd be the last chance I would have to do that for a long time. So I'll show you that in just a second, and we'll get started here. The Capitol's an amazing place, and it's really my honor to introduce you to someone who works there. Let me see now. Okay. So that's my last view of the Capitol for a while at least. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker, 7th District Representative Abigal Spanberger. Abigail is in her second term in Congress. She represents a competitive district that covers an area from suburban Henrico and Chesterfield counties to the rural areas like Orange and Louisa and Spotsylvania that's as far north as Fredericksburg. She's a Henrico resident, a proud graduate of J.R. Tucker and the University of Virginia. She's a former CIA field operative and also the mother of 3 very powerful young girls. In 1920, she was ranked as the 3rd most bipartisan elected official of the more than 600 members of Congress, the Senate, and the governors of the U.S. by common ground. That's 3 out of 600 in bipartisanship. And she's been recognized by both the Chamber of Commerce and Georgetown University's Lugar Center as one of the 5 most bipartisan Democrats in the U.S. And for that reason, and for many others, I'm proud to introduce today's speaker, my congresswoman, and my fellow Wahoo, and my friend Abigal Spanberger.
Thank you so much, Stan. It's good to see everyone. I'm really glad to be with you today, to be back with Encorepreneurs on this Tuesday morning. So I was really struck, and I'm going to pivot from what I was initially going to say with my introductory comments, because I think what Gary talked about was so important. The notion of trying to understand people's differing opinions, and the notion that when we have courage of our conviction and our principles, that doesn't mean that we can't take in new information, potentially shift, or grow in our own opinions. And Stan was kind enough to mention a couple of the things that I'm really proud about, which is my ratings for bipartisanship. And what I think is important here is I feel very strongly and advocate fiercely for the policies that I think are important, and the policies that frankly are important to the people I represent across our 10 counties. But I also feel very strongly that government works better when we build broader coalitions and bring people together. Yeah. And so for that reason, I have focused on finding common ground where possible. And that commitment has really been one that I have worked towards through my involvement in a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. We are half Democrats, half Republicans. We're currently 28 and 28. Noah's Ark joining mechanism. So you have to join with someone of the other party. And we get together at least once a week to talk about issues, sometimes really charged, really political, really difficult issues, and sometimes really straightforward bills that we can all join together on. But the value is we have the ability to sit around the table and ask each other, well, from your perspective, why would you oppose this? Or from your perspective, why would you support this? And the only real commonality that exists among the folks around that table in terms of their political, our differences are political, our differences are our districts, our priorities, all of it. But the thing that really unites us and puts us all there is our focus on choosing to be there and choosing to have conversations. And frankly speaking, in the past month, those conversations have been very, very difficult. In the past 2-3 months, those conversations have been very, very difficult. And there's been some folks who have thought about, walking away from that table, but we've routinely recommitted ourselves to the fact that particularly during times that are as challenging as these for our country, we need people who are committed, not necessarily always to agreeing, because we certainly don't do that, but at least understanding the other person's perspective. So I'm proud of my involvement with that organization. And notably, last year, it was us in partnership with a bipartisan group of senators who were able to restart after months of stalls, the COVID-19 negotiations that got us to a December relief package after months and months of failures of others to be able to do that. And it's because we had built those relationships, because we went in there, kind of put our emotions to the side and talked through the nuts and bolts of policy of what mattered back home. So right now, things on Capitol Hill, and that picture is beautiful, Stan, but things on Capitol Hill have been very challenging. We swore in a new Congress in the early months, the early days of January 3rd. A couple days later, we had an insurrection. A couple days later, we had an impeachment. A couple days later, we had the inauguration of a president. And we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So things have been charged, things have been difficult, but it has also been a real time where we need to focus on the things that matter. And the things that matter are ensuring that we can address this pandemic head on, and that we can address and by addressing it head on, it's ensuring vaccine distribution, ensuring the mechanism and the scope and the ability of states to be able to deploy vaccines across all of the states, of course, as a Virginian here across the Commonwealth. And it's about ensuring that we have a steady supply chain, not just of the vaccines, but of everything necessary and required to deliver those vaccines, the syringes, the PPE. And that's an important piece of what we're considering with COVID-19 relief moving forward, but it's also an important element and why I'm pleased that the president has invoked the Defense Production Act to ensure that we have the supply chains that we need. But of course, as all of you know, so much of our economy here in Central Virginia has been impacted by COVID-19, like it has everywhere across the country. And our small businesses and medium-sized businesses in particular need to be able to protect their workforce. They need consumer confidence to continue to grow, and they need to be able to recruit and hire skilled employees. And so for this reason, there's a variety of legislative efforts that I have engaged on, focused on educating the growing workforce or the future's workforce. And I have a bill called the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act, that it's a bipartisan bill that would give individuals across the country the ability to utilize 529 savings to cover the cost of workforce training and credentialing programs. And this is important not just for the youth, but also for those who might be retooling their skills into the future. There's another bill that I'm focused on, the Reset for America's Future Act, which is a bill that would ensure the grant dollars available to programs across states that run tremendous programs for those individuals who are SNAP recipients, for them to be able to develop workforce skill sets to be able to have gainful employment and ideally transition away from those safety net programs because of the employment. And then there's a bill that I just introduced with Young Kim, a new member, a Republican from California, called the Getting Americans Safely Back to Work Act. And this bill is focused on ensuring that America's small businesses and our communities have the ability to implement safety best practices, to put changes in infrastructure, be it plexiglass, be it cleaning protocols, be it training and resources like PPE for their employees, so that we can get Americans back to work, and small businesses that typically have a pretty tight budget are able to utilize those grant dollars to ensure that they have the supplies necessary to get their business back up and running, keep their employees safe, and also be able to demonstrate for the public that they are taking really important precautions to keep everyone safe. Another priority of mine, a long-term priority of mine, has been related to broadband connectivity. And certainly over the past the past year at this point, it's become so clear the real challenges that exist for communities where we do not have affordable, accessible internet. And I represent communities in our district where even if you are willing to pay anything, you just cannot get internet outside of really spotty potential satellite service. And certainly over the past year, we've seen the importance and the value of internet connectivity for school kids, for workforce, for people who want to work from home, and frankly, for our farmers and producers, where in the age of today's commerce, everything happens online. So I've initiated and led a variety of efforts in this space before the pandemic and certainly since, ensuring that Congress is prioritizing and protecting funding for these vital programs. So these are some of the things that I have been working on, looking forward, trying to figure out how it is that we are trying to ensure that we're building a correct plan to essentially build ourselves out of this pandemic. And while we're dealing with the public health crisis, that we're ensuring that we're giving people, small businesses and individuals, the tools to be able to really stabilize the economy and strengthen what's for so many been their livelihood. But I know that I want to spend a couple minutes talking about January 6th, because I think that for everyone who was watching from home, it was a pretty terrible day to watch. So this is me outside. This is my new office. Oh, Stan, you're moving fast. So Stan wanted pictures. Unfortunately, we recently moved. And this is my old office, 1239 in Longworth. I moved up 2 floors and another building or another floor in Longworth. I'm now on the 4th floor. And so here's the next picture, is a picture of our new office. This is as far as I've gotten with moving in, sadly. When we're on Capitol Hill, I do spend a lot of time in the office, but we've taken different protocols because of the pandemic, where typically it's me and one other staff member in the office. And typically we are there for vote rotations that have us elongating our vote time. So typically a vote would be 15 minutes in theory, and they'd usually stretch that to about 30 minutes in case there's anybody lagging. And that's for the first vote of the day. So typically that's about 30 minutes. And then subsequent to that, each vote in the vote series is usually another 5 minutes, sometimes lengthened to 7 or 10 minutes, depending upon if there's some members who are trying to hustle back. Now, because of COVID, we've been trying to vote in groups. And so the first votes can take an hour and a half, and then second votes can take 30 to 40 minutes. So this is our team. These are the people who serve the 7th district. We have moved to a virtual world. So we've got our legislative team and our district team here. And these are the folks, if you call our office, one of these individuals will be answering the phone. If you've got an issue with the VA or with Social Security, one of these folks will be the ones helping you. If you're a small business owner who wants to talk about a legislative idea or a challenge you're facing that you want to make us aware of, it's going to be one of these individuals. So half of them are based in the district, in our Spotsylvania or Henrico office, and then the rest are on Capitol Hill. These are the sorts of meetings. This is how we've transitioned in this time of COVID, doing a lot of Zoom meetings. That's me meeting in our old office. You'll see we've got things hanging on the wall. This was a meeting with AARP, and the gentleman to my left, well, if you're looking at it on the left side of me, is Nick, and he's our healthcare policy expert. And so issues related to healthcare policy, prescription drug policy, and associated programs like Medicare, Nick is the point person. So this is how we're taking meetings now in this time of COVID. Here we've got a picture where we were over at the health department in Henrico. You might mention, or you might recognize Danny Avula, who's now leading up the state's vaccine efforts, and Secretary Carey, Dan Carey, who's the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, is the individual in the foreground of that photo. So this was us doing an event. Well, I won't call it an event. We were meeting with public health experts from across the health district and meeting with community organizers to talk about what they were seeing on the ground. And this photo is from a couple months ago, before the vaccine was available. This is a picture I included for good measure, because I think everyone should take a moment in their day to tease Mark Warner. And so that's a picture of me with a giant Mark Warner head from an event over the summer. So a little bit of levity. This, my birthday is in August, and I was on a Zoom meeting with a number of my colleagues, and at the time, then candidate Biden, and someone alerted him to the fact that it was my birthday. So he broke into song and sang happy birthday to me. Of course, I am slow with my camera and only snapped a series of photos. I didn't manage to put it on video, but a fun memory for me for sure. This is a picture I took just the other day outside the Capitol. I frequently at times, particularly when I'm walking home from work very, very late at night, we'll take a picture of the Capitol at night. So my photos are not nearly as beautiful as Stan's, but I have a series of photos from across the past 2 years, snapped at various points in time in darkness of the Capitol. But I think it's important, particularly given how much damage was sustained to both sides of this building, to just document its resilience, which is both physical and in fact symbolic. This is our new office. I took this picture because you're standing in the elevator banks when I took this picture. So it's a very easy to find office for when the Capitol opens back up to the public. It's currently closed because of COVID, but we will be very easy to find. And I have already apologized to our team because I anticipate we will be getting lots of lost tourists looking for someone else's office, but we are the first one you find when you get off the elevator. This is our subcommittee on conservation and forestry. I am the chair of this committee. And so this is one of our committee meetings. That's Bonnie Krenz in the photo standing next to me. She's the chief of staff for our team, an incredible person, incredible background. She's an economist by background, spent years working various different development programs in East Africa, returned back home and wanted to work on Capitol Hill. And I was lucky enough to get her on our team. And so she's a tremendous, tremendous resource. And this is at the start of a committee meeting. So there we've got, walking down the hallway, we've got me and Bonnie and Connor, who's our comms director. So if you enjoy any amount of our congressional side tweets or press releases, that's all coming from Connor and his team. And we do have a newsletter that we send out every Friday. If you're not receiving it, I recommend you get on it. We provide a lot of valuable information, both what we're hearing from the state related to vaccines and related information, but then also about legislatively what's happening on Capitol Hill. So here is a picture. This is in the Capitol building. And here I am actually visiting with a constituent who is a minister, a constituent who's a minister at a church in Henrico, though he lives in Chesterfield. And before the pandemic, we could invite religious leaders from our districts to conduct the opening prayer. And so Reverend Watson came to the Capitol, conducted the opening prayer, which was absolutely beautiful. And then I gave him a tour, although this picture was snapped in a moment when I was more transfixed by the story he was telling than the tour I was giving. This is a photo that I took on January 6th, right before the insurrection began. You'll notice it's from a higher angle, and that's because of COVID protocols. We have endeavored to not have as many people on the floor of the chamber. And so because I wasn't going to be debating that day, it was folks from the Judiciary Committee and then individuals who represent either Pennsylvania or Arizona who were going to be speaking on the floor that day. I was up in the gallery, and that's a picture of Congressman Raskin of Maryland, who was handling the floor debate. And the picture struck me. Congressman Raskin had recently lost his son, and I thought it was a picture of his resolve and his commitment to the Constitution. So I took it to be able to send it to him later to document that moment for him. But then, of course, the day went not as expected. So it has a whole different meaning now to me. This is the inauguration with a couple of my colleagues. We've got Elaine Luria, If you're looking at the photo, she is on the right side of me. Elaine Luria from Virginia 2nd. Alyssa Slotkin is standing, again, looking at the photo to my left. Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey, Chrissy Houlihan, and Jason Crow. So these are members of Congress from across the country who I entered with in 2018. We were elected together in 2018. This is at the inauguration, which was a beautiful event, but one that I think a lot of people were really worried about, especially those of us who had been in the Capitol on January 6th. You know, I was personally very worried about what might happen on Inauguration Day.
I believe that's all of them, Abigail.
Excellent.
Let me get you back here. Okay. Yeah. Did you had said you were going to talk a little bit about the 6th?
Yes, I'm happy to, unless Nancy has specific questions about the 6th. Oh, you're muted, Nancy.
Thank you. Why don't you just jump in about your thoughts and feelings and experience of the day?
Absolutely. So on January 6th, as I showed in that photo, I was seated in the gallery. And so initial debate had begun, and then it very quickly became clear that there was going to be pretty heightened tensions. Now, I had anticipated that there might be challenges around the Capitol building. I had asked nobody from my team, either don't come to the office, or if you do, please dress down. Don't be identifiable as a Hill staffer, knowing that there was going to be some level of tension outside the Capitol. But as we were beginning debate on the House floor to go through the process of recognizing all the electoral votes, and so the vice president was seated in the speaker's chair, and members of Congress and both House and Senate were on the House floor, it became clear that there was kind of tensions rising. We were getting reports that there were people headed towards the Capitol. So again, at that point, I think most people were just anticipating loud protests outside the offices as opposed to anything more violent. But very quickly it escalated. There was in the way the process goes, state by state, the state is called and then the electoral votes are read. And that's the process of recognizing each state. We got as far as Arizona, and there was a motion to contest those results. And so at that point, the joint session stops. The senators went back to their chamber with the vice president. We remained in ours. The Speaker of the House took the seat in the Speaker's chair, and it was carrying on for a couple minutes before the Speaker of the House was quickly escorted out. At that time, it was very clear that something was not going as planned. We continued debate. Now we know that we were continuing debate in the House, even as there were people who had already breached the doors. In a flurry, we had to get out gas masks. At that point, a chemical irritant had been dispersed. Some of it by police trying to hold back the mob, some by mob members trying to overpower the police. So at that point, it just became heavily chaotic. Everyone got out gas masks, we put them on, we took them off. And eventually the people who were on the floor were able to evacuate out, whereas those of us in the gallery were stuck in the chamber for about another 45 minutes. We were on one side. There was no way to evacuate out because the mob was on the side and at the doors where we were. And so the police officers were barricading up the door. There's a couple pretty famous at this point photos of police officers with benches and tables in front of a door. There was screaming, there was constant yelling. You could hear just the people banging on the doors and screaming. We were in there in the chamber when the woman was shot, with the group of the mob trying to make way to enter the chamber where we were. And so it was a really frenzied situation for quite a while. And then ultimately we were able to get out of the building once the police had taken control of at least one side of the doors internally. And so we kind of ran out, evacuated out. There were insurrectionists, mob prone out on the ground, police there. And we just evacuated downstairs through the tunnels into another building. And so it was very, very chaotic. And certainly unlike and unlike anything you would expect to see at the Capitol.
Wow. And I think we became aware too, as I know you were so involved with, is that there were a lot of journalists present because of the events going on that day. Can you speak a little bit to how that made it even more complex?
So there were journalists are typically usually always up in the gallery. There's a set location for journalists to continue their reporting. So they were in their usual place. But once the building was under attack, after the floor had been evacuated, at that point, the members of Congress who were up in the gallery and the members of the press ended up getting heavily, we all became just one big mass of people trying to figure out how to get out. What was really notable is that, we were alternating between putting on gas masks, taking off gas masks. At one point when the mob was trying to get through the door and the police were all, guns pointed and trained on the doors, there was the worry that perhaps there were firearms on the other side. So everyone's screaming for people to get down. I remember, and right now it's a charming memory. It wasn't such a charming moment, but some of the journalists whose, fingers were just tapping their phone, even as they're, huddling and even as they're lying down in between rows of seats, trying to document what happened. And the same is true when we were evacuating out. I ended up in this group with a kind of a gaggle of journalists. There were, I believe, as I remember it, there were 4 of them, and I was just right with them, fellow members of Congress in front of me and behind me, and then I got lumped in with this group of journalists. And as we're headed down the steps, a couple of them stopped to take pictures. And I remember with this one woman, it was comical in a sense, because there's police everywhere, there's guns trained, here are the people who were just banging on the door, and a couple of them just stopped to take pictures, and I just said, ladies, come on, let's go. And I know they were doing their job, but and I've since teased them about it, but they were and they told me that they were so terrified that it was their coping mechanism. And then we got to the evacuation point, and there's been a couple journalists who have mentioned this, and it was an evacuation point where they wanted to put members of Congress, and they were denying entry to members of the press. And I rather aggressively took issue with that, because, unlike me, where, I was going to be in what was deemed to be the safe room, at least I could go back to an office and lock myself in it and kind of sort of take my chances in that sense. But members of the press, there's no office, there's no place for them to go. So ultimately, another colleague whose office was very near to where we were, took them all to his office, where apparently there were far more snacks than in the safe room. So all's well that ends well. But it was certainly that moment when they thought they had gotten over the worst of it, to realize that they didn't have a place to go was pretty hard to watch, and certainly not acceptable.
Right. It strikes me, Congresswoman, that because of your background, that you might have more experience with situations this tense. And I'm just curious, as you viewed the whole thing, and as you sit back, you said that, post-COVID, you said it's likely we'll be able to visit the Capitol. What is your view about how safe members will feel at that moment, or your view on steps being taken to make sure that the building may at some point become accessible again to the people of the United States?
Well, I do think it's important that the building and the Capitol continue to be open spaces that belong to the American public, where people can come and walk into the offices of their members of Congress and feel that it's some kind of ownership or partnership in that. But I think there's some pretty straightforward steps that we can take to ensure a bit more security. Certainly, coming from my background, having worked in a whole host of different government buildings, including embassies overseas, the significant lack of security that exists around the United States Capitol, particularly if you juxtapose it with the White House, or I mean, museums even that have pretty rigorous security protocols, or office buildings in downtown DC or downtown Richmond, where you have to show your ID and check in. None of that exists at the Capitol. And there's some certain things, typically people will go through metal detectors, which I think is important. But there's this courtesy extended to members of Congress where, we can just bring in anybody at any time. And I think that creates a bit of a challenge, because then there's not really an understanding of who's coming or who's going. And what's been notable to me has been some of the reaction of some staff members, because, I think about it from my perspective, but, I chose to be a figure who does TV ads. I chose to be in a place where, people either blame me or thank me for things. But a lot of our younger staff members, or age is irrelevant, folks who want to do the public service role of, writing legislation or meeting with constituents, they didn't sign up for some of what we signed up for. And so I think we have an obligation to ensure that their workplace is safe as well. So I think there's some pretty straightforward steps that we can take that keeps the place open and accessible, but also recognizing that, there are legitimate security steps. Yeah, there's far greater process to walk into a federal courthouse or the county buildings in Henrico than the United States Capitals. So I hope that we'll take some reasonable measures, informed measures, but attempt to keep the culture of it being an open place a strong one that every American can feel when they go to visit.
Agreed. Thank you. I do think it is the most beautiful building in Washington and maybe in the whole nation. And we have a new statue representing Virginia as well. So I think people are eager to get back to seeing the beauty and splendor of that. You mentioned the Problem Solver Caucus. It made me think about, we had learned that there's a regular meeting of all of the Congress representatives from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'm curious, given that a number of them have been on different sides of almost every issue, how has that been going? Has that been continuing in a way that helps relationships for potential unification on policies that would be really good for the Commonwealth?
So a significant point of pride for the Virginia delegation, and pretty much any one of us will tell anyone who will listen, we are the only state delegation that continues to meet Democrats and Republicans regularly, House and Senate members. So some states have their Democrats meet, their Republicans meet, but we are Senate and House separate, but we meet, and outside of COVID, it's once a month for lunch. And we sit together and have a long lunch and we talk about different policy things. We update the senators on things we're pursuing, where there might be room for them to prioritize the same things. They keep us updated. It's a great place for us to really talk about some of the Virginia specific priorities that we're working on. And in COVID, we've continued to do it. It's not as fun on Zoom or on a phone conference, but we have continued to keep the tradition alive. And when Congressman Riggleman was departing, we made a little bit of an exception to do an in-person, socially distanced in a large room in order to give him a departing gift. And all of us met together to bid him a fond farewell. And I was trying to actually find a photo of that for Stan, but I realized I think perhaps I've got to ask Bobby Scott or maybe Denver have it. So I've got to figure out who has the photo, because I actually never got my own version of it. But that's it, and it's an intentional thing. There's certainly times when we're aggressively disagreeing on policy issues, but if it's related to the Bay or it's related to our to different economic issues or veterans related legislation, there's always something. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work, but there's usually always something that we can agree on. And I think it's a proud tradition. According to Virginia lore, it was started by former Senator John Warner. And so I'm glad that he did it, and we continue it today.
Excellent, excellent. I don't know if this background gives you a unique perspective, but you were with law enforcement with the Postal Service at one point. Is that correct?
That's
Am
right.
I remembering correctly? And so a number of us are watching what's going on with the Postal Service and wonder what your thoughts are about whether that's going to, what is Congress's role in finding either short or long-term solutions to the operation of that service today?
So the Congressional Committee on Oversight has jurisdiction over the Postal Service. And certainly in the late months of the summer and the early months of the fall, there were tremendous reports related to delays in mail delivery. And our office continues to hear concerns about delays within post office and deliveries. It's tapered a little bit in terms of what we're hearing, but the issue continues to be ongoing. Part of one of, not to say this is a full explanation, but among the challenges that the post office might be facing in terms of delays were some decisions by the Postmaster General to take certain sorting machines offline to stop the availability of overtime pay for members of the workforce, which just created backlogs of mail for delivery. Certainly, they have ceased taking machines offline. They have changed and gone back to the prior protocols, but some of these delays continue. So it's an issue that is one of the ones we frequently talk about at our Virginia delegation meetings. I have gone out to the Sandston mail processing and delivery facility out in Sandston with Congressman McEachin for a joint tour. And this is an issue that we continue to watch. But I do think that if there's overall additional kind of systemic efforts that have been employed to slow mail delivery, then that's something that the Oversight Committee will get to the bottom of, and ideally we can ensure that that's no longer an issue.
You're still on two committees, correct? Agriculture and Foreign Affairs.
That's right.
What do you see as the most important pieces for those committees coming up in this year, for example?
And I'm excited about this question. We just had an Agriculture Committee meeting yesterday, or an organizing meeting, so not a full public committee hearing. And then Foreign Affairs, we're doing the same this week as well. In the Foreign Affairs Committee, there's so much, but I think just foundationally, it is ensuring that we can begin to rebuild to some degree our place in the world. We experienced a lot of challenges under the last administration because of policy, because of style, because of deprioritization. And that's, to Gary's point, that's my assessment, deprioritization of the value of diplomacy. And that's really created challenges for us within the world. The strength that we have as a country is unique, but a portion of that strength that we have as a country is built upon the fact that there are many people who want to be our partners and friends in many countries. And so in eroding some of those relationships, we've challenged our own position of strength. And even when we look at some of the challenges that we face related to Russia, related to Iran, related to China, so much of what has made the United States the power in the world is the fact that others want to join us in coalition against economic threats, against terrorist threats, against authoritarian threats. And so as we've eroded and degraded some of those relationships over the past couple of years, those will require rebuilding. There's also a major priority of mine has been the constitutionality of war-making powers. And it's not limited to one president or one party, but there has been significant I'll say stretching of the authorization of use of military force, the AUMFs, both the 2001 and the 2002. 2001 authorized us to go into Afghanistan to fight those who orchestrated the 9/11 attacks and all those who gave them safe harbor and support. And so practically 20 years later, we're in a place where that authorization of use of military force is being used to justify engagement in other places of the world where people did not give safe harbor to those who committed the atrocities of 9/11. So being able to kind of stretch those authorizations out is something that each sequence of presidents has done, and it comes down to congressional willingness to reassert our own authority. I would argue that it isn't just because prior presidents have wanted to stretch those AUMFs. I would argue that there are many members of Congress who haven't wanted to vote on whether or not to send somebody else's child or spouse or loved one off to war. And so at times it is easier to let that stretching happen. And so that's a major priority of mine. On the agriculture side, it's ensuring that our farmers and producers have the ability to be part of the conversation around all issues. Broadband internet connectivity, which causes a significant impact on their ability to do business and run their farms and run their operations. The climate change conversation, farmers and producers can be part of the solution there, and ensuring that they have a seat at the table when we're talking about conservation practices, or when we're talking about federal programs to encourage programs that are good for the environment, but also really good for a farmer's bottom line and output. And so those are the places on those two committees that I'm really focused.
Thank you. Excellent. Before I turn it over back to you and Stan for final words, I have one point of privilege and then one final question. For those of us who know the Raskins, Abigail talked about Jamie Raskin, and many of us know him through his service in Maryland, as well as for those of us on this call in particular who've been involved with the governance of financial institutions, know his wife, Sarah Bloom Raskin, who has served with the state of Maryland Financial Institutions Board, as well as the Federal Reserve Board. If you ever need a moment of inspiration, this couple's letter to the Washington Post right after their son took his life, faced with depression. Look in the Washington Post for the letter that they wrote to the Washington Post in honor of their son. It is quite an inspiring moment, and to know that the day after his funeral that Jamie was there at Congress working hard on what he thought was important is also inspiring.
And if I can add a little bit of background on that, the letter that he wrote about his son is the most poetic, beautiful thing that anyone could imagine. But a piece of real horror on the 6th is Jamie's daughter and son-in-law were in the Capitol. They had come to watch him do the opening remarks. They, of course, were in town because of her brother's funeral. And when they started locking everything down, and it was clear that there was a problem, she had been up in the gallery with us, and he kept looking up to find her. And she had already left with his chief of staff to go to another office. And we were frantically trying to, at what point in time did they leave? How far could they have gotten? Because he couldn't find her. Mm-hmm. And so just at that moment when he was being evacuated, having just lost his son, there was a frenzy of people trying to find her. And ultimately she and her husband and chief of staff were barricaded in an office in the Capitol. Insurrectionists and the mob made their way into the larger office where they were barricaded, and just banged on the door and screamed. So just thinking about what that day meant, it was his resilience is an inspiration on any hard day. His resilience is an inspiration to all of us.
Exactly. And yours as well. And I want to wrap up with this wonderfully light question from our good friend, Rabbi Michael Knopf, who wants to know what the process and protocol is for deciding what to order for lunch in the Problem Solvers Caucus when you meet in person.
Okay, I'll be very honest. So we typically meet for breakfast, and we trade off who has the duty of ordering the breakfast. And there is a clear distinction between, and I don't want to get political, I don't want to get gendered in this, but there's a clear distinction on who orders a good breakfast or who doesn't. We don't hold it against each other when we're looking for co-sponsors on our legislation, but I have literally been to breakfasts where it's just black coffee, not a creamer, not a sugar packet in sight. And then we have others where people really lean in, and it's, a full breakfast array. And then there's the sort of frenzied last minute Dunkin' Donuts, the donut holes from the cafeteria downstairs, which, while we know it's clearly a last minute decision to bring the donut holes and coffee, I don't hold that against people nearly as much as the black coffee, no creamer, no sugar, no effort to feed people breakfast. So I actually haven't hosted breakfast, so I guess I shouldn't yet sit in judgment. My name hasn't come up. But now that I have made myself accountable to you all, I'm clearly going to have to do some sort of breakfast sandwich with legitimate nourishing capabilities when we resume our in-person meetings.
Maybe some Virginia biscuits are in order.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
And with that note, I'll turn it back over to Stan for all closing remarks with you and our wonderful Congresswoman.
Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, we've had a visitor who wanted to hear more about what Abigail had to say. So, Abigail, at the last 2 years ago, you were very enthusiastic about what you were expecting and what you would see and what you would do in Congress. Just give us an update. How do you did you do the right thing?
Are you asking me if I'm questioning my life choices, Stan?
That's right. That's right.
I believe in our country. I believe in the American people. I don't mean to be Pollyanna about it. It is legitimately my sentiment. There have been days in this job that have been harder and more emotionally charged than I ever imagined I would encounter, especially coming from my CIA background, where you kind of focus and decisions are not with emotion in the same way, where you kind of just rack and stack ideas and prioritize, and someone puts an idea forth and you just say, no, I don't like it, or this is why I think that's bad. There's a lot more emotion tied into some of these things, which makes it so that disagreements and challenges between people can be far more brutal at times. But I maintain my enthusiasm and my optimism, and that is because despite all the challenges, despite literally a mob of insurrectionists invading our Capitol and terrorizing the space and creating what was a really awful, awful day, out of that darkness and challenge, I think we have the chance to question who we are as a people, what we want out of our government, what is the role of the federal government, what is our commitment to our democratic values, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're asking those sorts of questions, you have the ability to strengthen the foundation of it all. And so, I've my entire adult life, with the exception of 1 year in the private sector, has been in service to this country. And I believe in the mission of protecting the United States. I believe in a special role that we have in the world. And I think that this time, while filled with a lot of challenges, and to be clear, some days are actually really pull your hair out, agonizing. There are people who deserve a government that functions, who deserve legislators who are focused on policy, and who deserve something better. And so that's what continues to keep me going on the most challenging of days. And, there's people of significant principle on both sides of the aisle, and there are people of distraction on either side of the aisle. And so it's a matter of, focusing on the policy that makes a difference, and building up those coalitions and working for the things that we believe in. And so some days, I'm still drinking my problem solver black coffee at 10 o'clock at night, but it's still worth it. And I'm still grateful for the opportunity to be doing what I'm doing.
Thank you. Well, I guess the last thing I would say is please call on us and know that you can. And if you have any thoughts of any ways we can help you, feel free to share them with us.
Well,
think
I appreciate you inviting me back, and I just appreciate, looking through the gallery of everybody who's on the call, just a lot of community leaders in the business space, the nonprofit space, just the community focused space. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for all that you do for the community and for the people around us. So I appreciate that as well, and I appreciate the invitation back.
And by the way, I will make eggnog for your problem solver or your Virginia delegation if you would like.
That's a great idea. I'm going to take you up on that next winter.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, thank you again very much. We appreciate it. I wish I could be there to give you a gift of some kind, a speaker's gift or whatever, but we hopefully we'll see you in the Capitol sometime soon.
I look forward to it. And when you all arrange a visit up, I will give you a tour.
Great. That's what we like.
Entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.